So again, this is ransomware metrics for December 2025 year to date. Again, this is for the from last year, and we're going to do the whole month. So the entire year, I'm sorry, not the whole month, but for the entire year from January 1st of 2025 to December 31st of 2025. How did y'all this year fare up? You know, we had a total of 8,887 victims that were posted. We were tracking 127 different active threat actor groups. Yes, our job is very, very busy. Over the year, we had these were the top actors. Like I stated before, I thought QLin was going to try to come in at the top, and they definitely did with 1,087 victims. That was posted in total. 698 for Akira. Clop had 459 victims, which is kind of surprising because they massively, massively attacked anything that was a file transfer protocol. So when you had the Move It, you've had a couple other ones. You had the Oracle leakage not too long ago. Some of those seem to be still coming out, but Clop did not get as high on the list as even I thought they would in terms of numbers. But you know, hooray! All their efforts were not as grateful or was not as productive as we all thought that they would be. So hooray for us. 868 victims by the Play ransomware group, 438 victims by Inc. ransomware, and 336 victims by SafePlay. Not many people hear about SafePlay that much or Inc. ransomware group. They're kind of a lower level. And like I said, there's probably, I think right now, 29 active threat actor groups that we're actively tracking, if memory serves me correctly. Top countries impacted, no mysteries here. 3,829 victims in the US, 387 victims in Canada, 246 victims in Germany, 237 victims in the UK, and 149 victims in Italy. Again, this is not a complete list of all the countries that were impacted. This is just the top 5 that we see in the metrics that we have. Excuse me. Top industries impacted: construction of 488, 241 victims that were identified as law practices, 233 victims as IT consultants or services. That would be your MSSPs or your MSSPs, MSPs, IT vendors, things of that nature. 229 were around healthcare and hospitals. 191 victims in the real estate and 177 victims in manufacturing. I honestly thought manufacturing would be a lot higher on the list with some of the stuff that we were seeing, but the numbers are the numbers. When we look at the most targeted around here, everybody's always, we keep hearing every time, well, we're just too small to be impacted. Well, while you are lower on the totem pole, so to speak, in terms of numbers that have been published, again, this as always needs to be taken with a tad bit of grain of salt with all these slides. These are just the numbers that we know that have been disclosed. There is arguably a rule of thumb that for every one that's posted, there's maybe anywhere between 2 and 4 that were never posted at all, whether it's for decryption or suppression, things of that nature. So it's not just a 1-to-1. We know it's higher than a 1-to-1 ratio. We think it's anywhere, at least I do, anywhere between 2 and 4 non-posted to every one that was posted. But anyway, 554 victims of micro businesses. From 2 team members to 10 team members. Again, we can only go by the metrics of what, LinkedIn and, Zoom info and stuff like that go by or report them as. The organizations from 1 to 50 employees had 1,819 victims. From 51 to 200 employees, had 2,073 victims. From 201 to 500 employees, you had 589. Up to 1,000 employees, you had 519, and the larger ones, 549 of 1,001 to 5,000 employees. And if you had over 10,000 employees, took up the smallest subset of 229. So while we do see in the news, there are a ton of the ones that you hear about in the news that are like, oh my gosh, but that's because those are the big beasts in there, right? So how we like to think that the larger organizations have a little bit more, uh, what's the right word? A little bit more posture in their security frameworks and a little bit more alignment to whatever they're trying to adhere to. So that's they're not going to. Um, we haven't broke down the report to say, is this, um, was it supply chain or anything like that? Maybe we'll start doing that for 2026. I don't know. How many of these impacts were because of supply chain versus actual internal? Oh, something for me to think about. All right. So over the year, um, when we look at 2025 to 2024, how did things kind of rank up there, right? So as you can see here, we kind of talked about it before. The numbers of that are being impacted are much, much higher, ladies and gentlemen. The numbers are going up, right? Even you look at the top number of Ransom Hub in 2024 of 487, QLAN has already doubled, almost tripled the number of people that have been published on their page, um, at the 1087. So, when Lockbit was running 3.0, they're at 447. So you can see, Inc. ransomware is sitting at the lowest number that we have in here, at least as for a top 5 at 348, already stomps out the bottom 3, Play, Akira, and Hunters International from last year. So all these are new, AKA record highs that we are seeing. So, I know a lot of people like to say that ransomware is being cured, but it's just increasing, ladies and gentlemen. It really, really is. Yeah, how did the metrics increase over the same time frame? Construction definitely seen an increase in the number of 128, 148 um, the people, our organizations. Law practices definitely seen an increase of 95. IT services and healthcare both came in with 31 or 51 and 31 respectively. And something we really need to take a look at is real estate. A lot of people don't take they a lot of people blindly give real estate people so much information, um, because you're looking to buy your dream home, you're looking to buy your vacation home, whatever the case is, and we're obviously just giving over paperwork, right? So, and they're not holding it. So, definitely consider that if you're working with a real estate agent in the near future, or if you've worked with them in the past and you can get a hold of them, maybe you need to talk to them. Say, hey, what I can do to make sure that all of my information from our transaction of purchasing this house is gone, or selling this house is gone from your system. Can you verify that? Can you give me attestation letters? Don't become a statistic. All right. So in the news, what kind of stories did we see that may be interesting to you? Let's kind of go.
The forthcoming U.S. national cyber strategy must do more than set high-level goals. It needs to operationalize disruption of malicious cyber actors at scale, reduce internal and external barriers to action, and strengthen public-private collaboration to protect critical infrastructure and American innovation. Experts say current strategy drafts emphasize speed, resilience, and modernization across government and industry. But real progress will depend on removing policy friction points that prevent timely sharing of threat intelligence and coordinated action against ransomware gangs and nation-state adversaries. The piece also references past ransomware disruption efforts and calls for more routine collaboration and information exchange between industry and federal agencies to amplify impact.
Yeah, so this is something that's always a top of mind, and we always hear about this at every conference, right, ladies and gentlemen? So, what are we going to do about, you know, dwell time from the impact that was happening on the organization when the threat actor got in there to when you were able to respond or be alerted about it, to respond to the alert, things of that nature. I know a lot of people are attempting to leverage AI in a lot of these things, trying to go through that transaction. But you need to have real conversations about these type of things with leadership, right? And kind of go through this. This is the one thing a lot of people unfortunately start thinking about. It's like, oh, the government's going to put some policy together um, that will allow us to be better off than what we were. So I don't know how well that's going to work, right? Um, and I know previous administrations have all tried to do this public-private collaboration on global cyber threats. Well, while that may be good, a lot of CISA and FBI people are being gutted from internal. So I'm not sure how much this is going to work. And everything that I've seen so far, while it is public and private collaboration, it's with the big five of the cyber firms. You know, as much as I would love to sit in the room, as part of Barricade and be like, yep, nope, this is, you know, being old man to the clouds, like, ah, but we'll never get a seat at that table by any means. We're just way too small. Probably will never ever be that big. But the how much is this actually trickling down to the quote unquote everyday worker? It's not much, right? Um, so and note the link is in the chat for your reference, so that way you can further review.
Slovakia's Ministerstvo hospodárstva, Ministry of Economy, confirmed it detected a cybersecurity incident targeting its information systems on December 2nd, 2025. The government says the attempted intrusion was identified early and no data encryption or loss occurred thanks to rapid identification and intervention by national security teams, including NBU and the government's CSRT. Technical and organizational measures have been enacted to contain the incident and preserve forensic evidence. Officials continue collaborating with internal and external cybersecurity experts as the investigation progresses. Importantly, systems handling national energy aid calculations, managed outside the ministry's own platforms, were not compromised. Executive takeaways: incident response mattered. Early detection and coordinated action with National CERT and NBU likely prevented escalation. No confirmed data loss or encryption. Authorities report that sensitive operational data remained secure. Separation of systems helped. Critical public service systems, like energy assistance, were on independently secured infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean this. I used like 3 different articles to help generate that story read. Um, you know, if you take a look at what happened with Verizon yesterday, the massive outage they were suffering from, it was, and we still don't know. And I think this is going to be a lot of the same thing, right? So, potential tip of the hat to the security teams that had the early indicators. They reacted to that. Did they have an EDR that detected something and immediately isolated? I don't know. Again, there's a lot of stuff that's just not known in this particular situation. But I do think it's worth noting, at least a positive story, and to mention, like you heard um, the audio version of it, that they were able to, at least so far, isolate the incident. There was no ransomware. They got it before potentially any data exfiltration happened. So all in all, this is a good news story that would be allowed to um, take as a lesson. So definitely bookmark that one, follow the story, and be like, what lesson learned or what lessons are being disclosed that we could potentially implement into ours. So, this thing doesn't always have to be doom and gloom.
Fintech firm Marquis is notifying U.S. banks and credit unions after a ransomware attack in August 2025, allowed hackers to access files containing customer and business client data, according to regulatory breach notices. The Texas-based marketing and compliance vendor identified suspicious network activity before confirming that attackers had exploited its systems, including the company's SonicWall firewall, to gain initial access. Data potentially exposed includes names, addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, social security numbers, taxpayer IDs, and some financial account information, though Marquis says it has seen no evidence of misuse so far. The incident underscores third-party and supply chain risk in financial services. If a critical vendor is breached, that compromise can ripple downstream to client organizations, potentially exposing their customers' sensitive personal and financial information.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking at a story that I was getting ready to remove out of here, but forgot to do it on the VM. But yeah, fintech, financial technology, they handle a lot of the banking. Um, but they are a downstream to the U.S. banks and the credit bureaus, things of that nature. But they did suffer from a ransomware attack, and all the data was exfilled. At current time, when I looked at this last note, they have not disclosed, or there's been no data exfiltration. Sorry, there's been no publication of data exfiltration from the Marquis Group on any of the threat actor forums. In fact, since I have a little bit of bandwidth, let me just double check that statement because it has been a couple of days since I looked at that. Let me get into my CTI feed real quick. Bear with me a second. But yeah, the one thing we got to keep an eye on, is I don't see it in here. So that's good. Okay. So that statement still seems to be, accurate and correct, that we're not seeing anybody claiming responsibility. We're not seeing that, they're listed on any of the DLSs, and, maybe they probably made a payment. So for suppression. This kind of goes along with the whole Equifax and everything else that's going on. Our data is being freaking exposed everywhere. It's not hard for anybody to really just start doing a dossier on us anymore. That's why they say data potentially exposed includes names. That's such a legal thing, but I can guarantee you all that was probably exfiltrated. So, and we found an intruder exploited a SonicWall firewall on August 14th and possibly acquired certain files. SonicWall's been having a lot of problems this year. So, and we're still, even as of this week, we've got 3 more cases that potentially are related to SonicWall from some of their recent stuff. So definitely go and patch your SonicWalls. Please do due diligence. Just because there's a CVE that's released, read the full technical notes on these things, because it's not just, hey, we're going to install a patch update. There may be other mitigations that you have to do before and or after a patch is applied to ensure that everything is properly applied. Windows has a lot of known issues where you have to install reg keys and things of that nature for full implementation of things. Windows is also known, I should say Microsoft is also known, that after a patch is released for whatever, insert CVE that had a workaround registry key or file placement, whatever the case is, it doesn't go in and check for those workaround remediations that you put in. So keeping that as a part of your knowledge base to remove it as a temporary stopgap, if it needs to be, then definitely do that, because it could potentially cause some other issues. So
NCFE, the UK's major awarding organization, has taken key systems offline following a cybersecurity incident causing widespread disruption to its
I think my stories are out of order.
NCFE, the UK. The U.S. Department of the Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, has released a financial trend analysis of ransomware incidents reported under the Bank Secrecy Act, BSA, covering January 2022 through December 2024. The data highlights that ransomware remains a major threat to the U.S. economy, with 4,194 reported ransomware incidents and over $2.1 billion in ransom payments during that 3-year period, nearly matching the total reported over the prior 9 years combined. 2023 was a record year, with 1,512 incidents and about $1.1 billion in payments, up roughly 77% from 2022, before both incidents and total payments declined slightly in 2024 to 1,476 incidents and roughly $734 million, a change attributed in part to law enforcement action against by financial institutions to help law enforcement track threat patterns. Notable trend indicators and technical patterns. Ransomware variants. FinCEN identified more than 200 distinct ransomware variants reported in BSA filings, with the most commonly cited including Akira, LAFE Black Cat, Lockbit, Phobos, and Black Basta. Communication methods. Threat actors most often use the onion router, TOR, for communications with victims, cited in about 67% of cases where the method was reported, which echoes patterns seen in many ransomware syndicate operations and complicates tracking.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the FinCEN is definitely one of those platform or one of those reports that you really should read. Um, for those who don't know, what part, how does FinCEN get a lot of these numbers? In a lot of our matters that we work with, we file a IC3 report, and those who, is my mute, is that old? Audio 1, 2? Yeah, okay, sorry. The FinCEN gets a lot of the information that us as forensics and if we broker a payment to the threat actors as part of the engagement, FinCEN gets a lot of that information from the FBI when we file the IC3 report, and we have to be an MSB, a money services broker, so we pretty much flag everything as suspicious transactions and be able to go through, or they get a lot of those numbers, so they get that intel of who was it, how much money was sent, all that stuff, and are able to kind of go through that whole process of everything. So, these numbers are pretty accurate for the most part from an intelligence standpoint, and being able to know how much is actually being paid out. So when they say they seen 153 incidents. Granted, not every case actually gets reported to FinCEN because the client does not want us to report it to the FBI for whatever reason. I mean, they're not required to, but us as an MSB, we're required to report "quote unquote" suspicious activity to FinCEN for notification. So, that's a government regulation that MSBs have to follow. So, 1.1 billion in payments. I would probably say that's probably a third of all the payments that were issued out. So we're probably looking at close to 4 billion altogether is my guesstimation of this particular thing. So, definitely look at this and, know that, the payments are going up, the activity is going up, make sure you're starting to adopt a real world mindset, threat landscape mindset in these things to help minimize your impact.
The Ladies' College in Guernsey was the victim of a ransomware attack discovered on June 24, 2024, when staff were unable to access several on-premises servers. An internal investigation and a subsequent review by the Office of the Data Protection Authority ODPA, found that attackers gained unauthorized access and encrypted portions of the school's systems through a brute force compromise of an administrator account protected by a weak password and lacking multi-factor authentication. The ODPA determined the school had failed to secure remote access properly and lacked effective monitoring and alerting for suspicious activity, weaknesses that enabled the intrusion. While most encrypted files did not involve personal information and there's no evidence of exfiltration, some limited personal data was affected before systems were restored.
Yep. So things to note in this one is, an administrator account was vulnerable to a brute force attack. That's a big red flag for me. Especially in my field because it's very very easy to set up alerting around that type of alert. Now, whether that was in place here and then they just didn't respond or whatever the case is, that's kind of a limitation, right? The not having multi-factor is also another one, but you know, I would say having alerting for brute force attacking could easily have prevented a lot of this stuff, after 5, 10, 15, whatever your magic number is, failed logins over a X time frame, you could have easily gone in there, or the security team could easily have gone in there, disabled that account, and start looking at what IP address is coming from and blocked it at the firewall, right? So, there's things to consider for this thing. Yes, multi-factor would have been nice, but I would say the first failure in this particular one, based off the information that we have, is non-compliant or non-notification to the impacted entities or to the security team or IT team about a brute force attack, right? And this is something for you to consider as well. you know, and that's kind of what between that, and if you are like me and you have a little one that's getting ready to go to college soon, we're seeing it all the time where schools and municipalities are being impacted by ransomware attacks. What do you do, or what is your school doing in the event there is a ransomware attack and learning is essentially disrupted, whether it's your school, your public private school that you're already in, or if they're going off to college, what is their protocols for these type of situations? Um, it's not something to go massive tinfoil hat on, um, because if they get hacked, they get hacked. It's something that they'll have to deal with. But you know, are they taking a vacation for a couple weeks? And if that's the case, then fine. Let's bring them back home for a couple weeks and hang out and spend some quality time with your college student, right? Um, Whatever the case is. So go through and learn some stuff.
The village of Gulf Manor, Ohio, is considering paying a $10,000 ransom
Which
after a
they did.
ransomware attack encrypted its internal computer network and backups, locking officials out of systems and disrupting operations. The attackers have also threatened to publish stolen data if the ransom isn't paid. Local leaders haven't disclosed how the attack occurred or whether residents' personal information was compromised, and the council is scheduled to vote on authorizing the payment under Ohio's new law requiring formal approval for ransomware payments by local governments. Officials say alternative recovery methods could cost more than $150,000, and that paying the ransom may help restore essential services more quickly. A similar community cyber incident recently impacted the nearby city of Middletown.
Yeah. So the reason I wanted to bring this one up, again, this is a little bit old. They ended up paying from everything that we've been able to gather. And I'm not going to play the video here, but this image does weigh in a lot. Weighs paying up to $10,000 in ransom. No offense, but that is dirt freaking cheap. It really, really is. You know, it takes a long time to get a threat actor down to $10,000. Experts say that alternative solutions would cost over $150,000 or more. And the article showed and discussed where, talking about data restoration or recovery efforts, you know, could cost a lot more. And this is where businesses really make a real business decision. You know, granted, we have backups, we have this, we have that, or whatever the case is, but it's going to take too long for us to restore. It's going to take too long to rebuild, all this other stuff. But paying a $10,000 demand right now will bring us back up in under 12 hours versus 150K. And, we could be down for months. So this is why, even if you have backups, organizations will consider making a ransom payment. So please don't mistake that just because they made a payment doesn't mean they didn't have valuable backups. It could be for suppression. It could be for quicker restoration efforts, things of that nature, right? So, this is something to consider when you go through. And, one of your situations when you're doing your disaster recovery in the part 4, ransomware, what is the approval process for making a possible payment? Well, do not settle on, we stand firm, we will never pay a threat actor ever. Well, let's just go down that rabbit hole. What if? What if we did? What if this? What if that? And we needed to. Or you're going to shut your business down. Is shutting your business down an acceptable outcome for you, Mr. or Mrs. Executive? Right? So these are conversations to have, right? So do that as part of your preparation.
The village of Gulf Manor. Security researchers at Cisco Talos have uncovered a sophisticated ransomware campaign in which threat actors are deploying deadlock ransomware using a previously unknown loader and a bring your own vulnerable driver (BYOVD) technique to bypass endpoint defenses. In this campaign, attackers exploit the Baidu antivirus driver vulnerability CVE 2024-51324 to disable endpoint detection and response EDR tools, then run scripts to disable Windows Defender, terminate backup and security services, and delete volume shadow copies, making recovery much harder without paying ransom. Deadlock then uses a custom stream cipher encryption algorithm that targets enterprise file types while avoiding system corruption. This approach highlights how attackers are combining defense evasion tactics with novel loader methods to increase the chance of successful encryption and operational disruption, a trend that raises risk for businesses relying on Windows environments with unpatched or vulnerable third-party drivers.
Yeah, this is definitely an article to go through. It's too much for this podcast to really do, but you can see a lot of, PowerShell snippets. They are utilizing the bypassing the UAC tactic. This goes right along into Python, which I can sort of read, but I'm not very, very good. Like I said, it's kind of outside of my wheelhouse, but this is Windows API calls right here. Service not to stop. Okay, so it's setting the exclusion not to stop those services, which is a known thing. So one thing to notice as well, if you have a way to detect this, is the detection of multiple services being shut down. That's not part of a reboot cycle. Ransomware threat actors are going to shut down services that are not for critical operations, and to remove the complications for data encryption, right? So if the service is running, therefore a file is in use and cannot be written by a payload. So there's a lot of good nuggets in here. We actually build a lot of these things into our forensics tools. Like, anytime we see WinObject Win32 share filter, this has been used by threat actors for years and years and years. And when we start seeing stuff like that, that's not a typical thing that your IT administrator is going to do. So it's definitely one of those red flags. Yeah, adding registry keys to the Windows terminal server, exactly. Allowing the firewall rule into the environment, which by default most of the time it's already enabled. So just having this command run by default is a pretty big red flag, unless you got an organization that's actually got some sort of lockdown. That's very, very important. The use of AnyDesk, the command line to start the services, set password, and do the control. AnyDesk is still very, very proficient, even though we don't see threat actors doing the installation of AnyDesk that much anymore. We do see them doing the standalone version of it. So, definitely send a filter that you're not just looking for it in the program files, whether 32 or 64-bit. And, but we also see a lot of threat actors are doing like AnyDesk space 1, AnyDesk space recovery, things of that nature. So make sure you have in your regedit or your registry filtering different variables for AnyDesk. And that'd be very, very beneficial for you as well. So yeah, this thing is definitely something to, take a look at, start building into your detections for these type of things, and kind of go through from there. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much. I do greatly appreciate you for joining. Definitely go to webinars.barricadecyber.com so that way you can be able to catch all the future episodes of this, and we will see y'all next time. Until then, stay secure, my friends.
I got tabs in the browser, I got tabs. I got tabs in the browser, I got tabs. I got tabs in the browser, I got tabs. I got them tabs. I got them tabs in the browser, so many tabs.